Bards in D&D have been an iconic class for play for anyone that wants to be the charismatic party face that can get them out of many situations by deceiving, distracting, or simply talking their way out of a potential fight with their absurdly high charisma skills. They're also not so bad in combat either. So in this video, we'll be going over some of the best feats you might consider to take to help be a better support for your party, both inside and outside of combat. And starting off at number 10, we have the Actor feat from the Player's Handbook. This feat lets you increase your charisma score by 1 to a max of 20, while also granting you a couple of unique benefits. Firstly, you now have advantage on deception and performance checks whenever you try to pass yourself off as a different person. And secondly, you gain the ability to mimic the speech of another person or the sounds made by other creatures. But you must have heard the person or creature speak or make the sound for at least 1 minute. And if a listener wants to determine that voice or sound they're hearing is fake, they can do so by making a successful insight check against your deception. What's nice about this feat is the fact that you're more than likely going to have proficiency in deception or performance checks by virtue of being a bard. And for those who want to double down on this, you gain the expertise class feature at 3rd level, which lets you choose 2 skill proficiencies and double the proficiency bonus added when making ability checks using those skills. So a bard with expertise in deception and performance checks will obviously gain a tremendous benefit from this feat. Certain bard subclasses, such as the College of Whispers subclass, gains abilities like Mantle of Whispers to help pass themselves off as other people, which Actor can help out with to an extensive degree. However, there are 2 downsides to this feat which keeps it from being any higher in this list. The first is that Actor doesn't really do much for you in combat, outside of increasing your spell save DC via a half ability score improvement, in a game where combat tends to lean more on the heavy side. But in a roleplay heavy setting, Actor can dominate when it comes to trying to infiltrate an enemy stronghold and wearing disguises in general. The second reason Actor only takes number 10 on this list is because bards are flexible in nature, despite the memes telling you otherwise. Because of the amount of skills you can be proficient with and have expertise in, bards don't have to be restricted to just taking charisma skills. In fact, they're the only class that lets you choose any 3 skills you want proficiency in. So if you want to lean more towards a stealthy build, you can take stealth and sleight of hand if you wanted. Or if you'd rather lean more towards learning and studying the secrets towards magic, you might take the arcana, etc, etc. So while Actor might be a really strong skill in the right hands, the truth is this feat only caters to a certain type of bard, which doesn't encompass every player that runs one. But when you do take this feat, however, you are sure to make excellent use of it throughout the campaign. And at number 9, we have the Healer feat from the PHB. This feat grants you the very useful benefit of making better use of healer's kits by allowing you to automatically restore 1 hit point to any creature you manage to stabilize using it. As an added bonus, you also gain the ability to expend the use of a healer's kit as an action to restore hit points to a creature equal to 1d6 plus 4 plus their number of hit die. So if you heal a 10th level creature, that creature regains a total of 1d6 plus 4 plus 10 hit points. After a creature regains hit points in this way, they can't do so again until they finish a short or long rest. This is a nice feat that allows bards to have a little bit of extra healing and save on spell slots. While they do have access to Cure Wounds and Healing Word, it's almost more beneficial to heal a creature using as little resources as possible. And since healer kits are relatively cheap and come with 10 charges, the Healer feat acts as a great emergency tool, even if you can only apply it to 1 creature per short rest. As for the first benefit, being able to instantly bring up an ally back to consciousness with only the cost of 1 of your healer kit charges is tremendously helpful to have, since the alternative is Cure Wounds, which costs a whole spell slot and doesn't really heal enough to make it worth using over a healer's kit if you have one. Obviously, from range, Healing Word is better since it has a range of 60 feet and costs a bonus action. However, Healing Word kind of gets a pass since you can combine this with the action heal from a healer's kit for a bit of extra healing if you need it. You can even take this feat regardless of whatever subclass you are or whatever build you might be going for, and your main healer will most certainly thank you for the bit of extra help. Unfortunately, there are some downsides to this feat that keep it at the number 9 spot on the list. First of all, this feat doesn't allow you to increase any of your stats, which means you don't get any generic benefits to your spells to fall back on. The other thing is the fact that this feat is only at its peak in the early levels. While 1d6 plus 4 hit points restored on a 4th level creature is a nice bit of healing when compared to the overall damage your party will be taking, 1d6 plus 4 plus 20 on a 20th level creature with over 160 hit points is not really going to be doing as much, especially when you have creatures dealing an average of at least 50 damage in a single turn. So while useful for the early game, the healer feat does tend to fall off in the later parts of a campaign, which is why it takes one of the lower spots on this list. And at number 8, we have Telekinetic from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This is a feat that gives you a half ability score improvement by allowing you to increase your choice of intelligence, wisdom, or charisma by 1 to a max of 20, teaching you the Mage Hand cantrip that you can cast without using verbal or somatic components, while also making it invisible, which also comes with the added benefit of having its range increased by 30 feet whenever you cast it if you already know the cantrip before taking this feat. And you are granted a new bonus action to try and shove one creature you can see within 30 feet of you. When you do so, that creature must succeed on a strength saving throw against your save DC, which is based on whatever stat you chose to increase with this feat, or be moved 5 feet toward or away from you. Now, the nice thing about this feature in particular is the fact that it explicitly states that a creature can willingly fail the save, meaning that it has one extra benefit of being able to displace your own party members in a pinch. Maybe you want to get your healer 5 feet away from a creature that tried to rush them. So now they have the opportunity to move away from that creature without provoking any opportunity attacks, for instance. But of course, you will always have the funny option of shoving creatures off ledges to great effect. But let's also not underestimate the many situations where having an invisible mage hand might be useful, especially for a bard that lights up their own performances by adding a little bit of extra flair, by violently slamming some window shutters shut at the perfect moment while talking about a spooky horror story to some children at an orphanage during Hallow's End, or whatever Halloween equivalent your campaign setting might have. There's also the more practical use of Mage Hand by using it to comb a room for traps, activating them from a safe distance if you don't feel like attempting to disable them, or if you can afford to, since some traps might trigger alarms or make loud noises, or might trigger a different kind of trap you weren't expecting. Overall, Telekinetic is a great feat for almost any class with a bonus action to spare, since it does give you something to do with your bonus action every turn in combat. While you're spending your action performing spells like Hypnotic Pattern to incapacitate creatures, you can be using your bonus action to be mean and shove them off ledges, since Hypnotic Pattern only breaks if they take damage, or a creature slaps them awake with their action. Overall, Telekinetic is a nice feat to take for a bard because it's useful both in combat and outside of it, since Mage Hand on its own has always had the potential to do crazy and out-of-pocket things if you have a creative enough mind. And with the ability score improvement allowing you to increase your charisma to further boost the overall usefulness of your spells and DC saves, this just makes it a perfect example of what kind of feats we're looking for when it comes to the best feats for bards. And at number 7, we have a two-way tie between Crossbow Expert and Spell Sniper, both of which are from the PHB. Both of these feats do relatively different things when compared to each other, but possess one quality that makes these two take the same spot on this list. First, let's go over Crossbow Expert. This is a feat that grants you the ability to ignore the loading quality of crossbows that you're proficient with, allows you to no longer suffer from disadvantage on ranged attack rolls as a result of a hostile creature being within 5 feet of you, and you get the option to make a bonus action attack with a hand crossbow you're holding whenever you take the attack action to attack with a one-handed weapon. As for Spell Sniper, you learn one cantrip that requires an attack roll for your choice of either Bard, Cleric, Druid, Sorcerer, Warlock, or Wizard spell list, using the spellcasting ability of whichever spell list that cantrip was taken from. Charisma for Bard, Sorcerer, or Warlock, Wisdom for Cleric or Druid, and Intelligence for Wizard. You also get to double the effective range of all spells you cast, which require an attack roll, and those ranged spell attacks also ignore half cover and 3/4 cover, meaning creatures can't gain a +2 or +5 bonus, respectively, to their AC and Dexterity saving throws by trying to utilize cover. While both of these feats are great on their own, they work very well together because Crossbow Expert's specific wording of allowing ranged attacks to no longer have disadvantage if there's a hostile creature within 5 feet of you also happens to apply to your ranged spell attacks. Combine that with Spell Sniper's ability to ignore all but total cover, and you have a spellcaster that can be useful as any range with no downsides. You also have a generous list of cantrips you can choose from, including those you don't normally learn, such as Eldritch Blast. And since you're a Charisma caster, Eldritch Blast is a great pick, especially since you can cast multiple blasts dealing 1d10 force damage each at higher levels, up to a maximum of 4 blasts at 17th level. And since Eldritch Blast already has an incredible range of 120 feet, Spell Sniper doubling that to 240 feet basically covers most larger sized maps with no problem. Crossbow Expert also tends to benefit bards more than other classes purely because of their innate proficiency in hand crossbows, allowing them to effectively attack twice per turn with it under normal circumstances by using their action and bonus action attacks, and attack 3 times if they're a subclass that allows them to use the extra attack feature, like College of Swords or College of Valor Bards. This is because hand crossbows automatically fulfills this feat's own condition, since you ignore the loading properties of it and it's considered a one-handed weapon, allowing you to proc a bonus action attack with your hand crossbow. But if you're more magic leaning, then Spell Sniper might be the better option for you, assuming you can't or don't want to take both these feats. Either way, you can't go wrong with either of these feats if you want to enhance your spellcasting, which is why they both take the same spot on this list at number 7. And at number 6, we have Inspiring Leader from the PHB. This feat lets you spend 10 minutes rallying and inspiring up to 6 friendly creatures within 30 feet of you and grant them temporary hit points equal to your level plus your charisma modifier. These hit points last until they're depleted, or those creatures affected by this effect have finished a long rest. Creatures also can't be affected by Inspiring Leader again until they finish a short or long rest. Now, this is a great feat to have on any charisma-based character, since it offers a ton of free temporary hit points, which acts as a small buffer to your health pool since they are depleted before your actual hit points. While you can't infinitely stack these temporary hit points, creatures only needing to take a short rest at minimum in order to benefit from Inspiring Leader again allows you to infinitely refresh these temporary hit points if someone happens to lose any, which can be incredibly useful throughout a day of constant battles taking place. Having access to a large number of temporary hit points throughout the adventuring day is one of the strongest effects in D&D, since, in total, the sheer amount of buffer your party has basically forces your DM to try and deal more damage to you and your party members. At 12th level with 20 charisma, that's 17 temporary hit points to each creature you target with it, which is about 68 extra hit points total for an average party of 4. And if you have a familiar or if your party member has an animal companion they like to travel with, that's 102 total hit points you've just given to your entire traveling party. And if you find an opportunity to short rest after a long combat, that's potentially even more buffer you can add in. The only real downside is finding time to short rest so that you can refresh any remaining temporary hit points. Also, spending 10 minutes rallying your teammates might get a bit time consuming if you're actually giving some sort of inspiring speech every time. But that can always be remedied by fast forwarding with something you and your DM might agree is just something generic, while saving the big, flavorful speech for just before your party storms the big bad evil guy's secret lair or something. Overall, Inspiring Leader is an excellent feat for bards to take because it adds a bit of extra support that can benefit your party members and even make your healers happy to not have to heal as often or worry about taking a single meaty hit before being taken down. Even if you're only able to use it after a long rest, that's still an incredible amount of extra buffer you'll be providing to all of your party members, which is why this feat takes a higher spot on this list than other entries. It's just that good, even without having a half ability score increase attached to it. And at number 5, we have Magic Initiate from the PHB. This is a feat that grants you 2 cantrips and 1 first level spell, all of which you must choose from one of 6 spell lists: Bard, Cleric, Druid, Sorcerer, Warlock, or Wizard. You can cast the 2 cantrips as many times as you like, of course, but your first level spell only lets you cast it at its lowest level once per long rest. A later errata from the Sage Advice Compendium does technically allow you to use your own spell slots, but only if your chosen spell was from the same spell list as the class you're playing. So if you're a bard and choose only bard spells, then you qualify. However, since this isn't explicitly stated or baked into the description of Magic Initiate itself, you're most likely going to be using Magic Initiate as written, which kind of limits what you can do with this feat. However, being able to cast Find Familiar, a spell that's widely regarded as one of the most powerful ones in the game, simply due to the fact that the familiar can just be a help dispenser in combat, is insanely useful. But you can also use Magic Initiate to take more cantrips to use on a regular basis. As mentioned previously, Eldritch Blast is always a great spell to take, especially since you can use your own charisma to make it as accurate as possible. If you don't want to gamble multiple bolts, however, then Firebolt from the sorcery spell list might just suit your fancy, since you can just deal the entirety of the damage at one go. Mind Sliver is also a pretty decent cantrip, as it's an early form of psychic damage, albeit only a 1d6. And comes with the added benefit of debuffing the creature's next saving throw they make before the end of your next turn by subtracting a 1d4 from it. It's also a really solid cantrip for targeting a creature's intelligence stat, which is one of the best stats to target, since a lot of creatures in the monster manual that aren't spellcasters tend to have a really low intelligence score compared to the rest of their stats. And if you're using the Sage Advice to allow your bard to use your own spell slots for the spell, then there are plenty of spells that you can learn that can save you the trouble of choice paralysis later. Silvery Barbs is always an obvious pick if you haven't taken it already, as it allows you to force the creature to reroll a successful d20 roll using the lower roll, then granting yourself or an ally advantage on the next d20 roll they make within the next minute, all as a reaction and doesn't require concentration to maintain an ally's advantage. This is all in a first level spell, and is often banned or nerfed significantly at certain tables, making this a perfect candidate to take for something like Magic Initiate. Outside of that, spells like Fairy Fire is also excellent, as it's a way to potentially provide advantage to you and your allies' attack rolls to a group of enemies, as well as being a good way to disrupt an opponent's invisibility if they fail their dex roll to avoid the spell's effects. All in all, a great feat to take, but does come with some limitations that prevent it from being any higher on the list. And at number 4, we have the Mobile feat. This is a feat that grants you the following 3 benefits. It increases your speed by 10 feet. Whenever you use the dash action, difficult terrain doesn't cost you extra movement on that turn. And anytime you make a melee attack against a creature, whether you hit or miss, you don't provoke opportunity attacks from that creature for the rest of the turn. Now, a feat like this can have varying ways of being useful depending on what kind of bard you're running. A Valor or Swords bard might have more use out of not provoking opportunity attacks from creatures, as they might favor making melee weapon attacks against creatures. However, a spellcasting bard might make more use of the extra 10 feet of movement to maintain a safe distance from enemies that might try to rush them in the middle of combat. Meanwhile, the dash action ignoring difficult terrain might be a bit difficult to pinpoint in terms of usefulness, as you're not always going to find yourself in difficult terrain. And since dashing does cost you an action to do, you can't very easily dash out of difficult terrain dropped onto you via a spell or an item without also giving up the ability to cast spells altogether, unless you have something you can use as a bonus action. In cases like these, however, this is where spells like Misty Step come in handy, as this spell does cost a bonus action and allows you to teleport safely out of pretty much any difficult terrain, so long as the difficult terrain doesn't extend past 30 feet, since that's also the range of Misty Step. Unfortunately, without a reliable way to get Misty Step, you are, sadly, stuck with getting out the old-fashioned way, which is why this benefit of mobile isn't entirely off the table. There are, of course, out-of-combat ways this feat can be used, since dashing wouldn't really inhibit your ability to do much else. If you're traversing past an environment where the floor might be too sticky to move naturally, or if it only counts as difficult terrain in terms of reduced movement, then mobile is perfect for getting your bard out of such sticky situations. Regardless, this feat takes number 4 spot on this list because of how generically useful it is for any kind of bard. And while it is technically useful for every class too, bards especially make use of mobile purely because they can still use features like bardic inspiration to buff allies and still feel useful after dashing to get out of difficult terrain, since bardic inspiration actually does cost a bonus action to do. So the bard technically gets more use out of this feat than other classes, whereas the main problem with most generic feats is that they only really get use from 1 or 2 of the listed benefits. And at number 3, we have Resilient and Warcaster feats from the PHB. Like the Crossbow Expert and Spell Sniper, these 2 feats do different things but culminate to one singular idea. Let's start with Resilient, however, since it's the easiest to explain. Resilient is a feat which grants you a half ability score improvement by allowing you to increase any one of your ability scores by 1 to a max of 20. Once you do so, you also gain proficiency in saving throws for the chosen ability. So if you choose to increase your wisdom score, you would also gain proficiency in all wisdom saving throws. For this reason, it's usually better to pick a stat in which you're already proficient in, otherwise that would defeat the purpose of taking this feat in the first place. Then you'd be better off taking another feat or increasing the chosen stat by 2 with the normal ability score improvement. That all being said, when it comes to a bard, you might consider taking Resilient for the same reason as other spellcasters, that being better concentration checks. Concentration checks are tied to your constitution stat and are considered constitution saving throws, meaning that having proficiency in constitution saves also means you have a better chance of passing concentration checks more effectively, which is super important for bards since they tend to lean more towards on a supportive role, throwing out buffs, maintaining crowd control spells, etc, etc. So if they want to maintain haste on a creature while minimizing the danger of that creature becoming lethargic and losing their next turn as a result of dropping concentration on that spell, then Resilient is one of 2 feats that might feel like a necessity to add to your build. The other feat is the aforementioned Warcaster feat. While Warcaster does have two other benefits, its main draw is its ability to grant you advantage on concentration checks, which can combo extremely well with Resilient in order to make losing concentration checks exceedingly difficult, if not impossible for enemies to break. As for the other two benefits of Warcaster, you also gain the ability to perform the somatic components of spells while wielding weapons or a shield in one or both hands, which works very well with College's sword bards since they can specialize in two-weapon fighting. You also get to replace your opportunity attack with a spell that costs one action, but must only target the creature, which can be useful for bards that want to cast something like Inflict Wounds, Toll the Dead, or Booming Blade, all of which are great single target spells that won't have disadvantage from casting it at a creature within 5 feet of you at the time of using the reaction. Bards can especially benefit from this part of the feat more than other spellcasters, simply because they have access to the Magical Secrets class feature at 10th level, which pretty much lets them take any 2 spells or cantrips from any spell list that they want, so the options are endless. Still, nothing beats having a nearly unbeatable concentration check that having Resilient or Warcaster gives you, but having both would be ideal, which is why both these feats are featured in the same spot on this list. Maintaining your concentration is essential for any spellcaster that wants to get the most out of any ability they cast, because nothing feels worse than casting a high-level concentration spell like Draconic Transformation, only to immediately lose concentration on it due to an unlucky low roll. As a result, these two feats are always going to be considered great feats to take on any spellcaster, which is why they always take the higher spots on these lists, and here is no exception. And at number 2, we have the Alert feat. This feat gives you the benefits of having a +5 bonus to your initiative, the ability to not be surprised while you're conscious, and creatures can no longer gain advantage on their attack rolls against you as a result of being unseen by you. While the latter two benefits are a bit niche, being able to effectively be immune to ambushes is always welcome. Combine that with being more likely to go first in combat, which can help turn their tables back around whenever the rest of your party members are caught by surprise by throwing out a slower hypnotic pattern, which is why Alert ranks so highly on this list. Going first in combat is one of the best things your party can do, because it automatically gives you an edge and grants you the highest chance of ending an encounter early before the enemy has a chance to even react. That being said, there's also merit to ignoring the advantage a creature would normally get from being unseen by you, because that's just extra defense and survivability, since less accuracy means less chance to be hit or critically hit. This also applies to creatures that are invisible, which again is a bit niche, but nice to have whenever you just so happen to encounter an invisible creature. Overall, the Alert feat is amazing on any character, but works especially well with bards since they tend to be the most supportive class that also happens to have access to some of the best crowd control options in the game via Magical Secrets. At the end of the day, you could never go wrong with having a higher initiative as well as immunity to ambushes, which is why Alert takes number 2 spot on this list. And for our number 1 pick, we have Fey Touched and Shadow Touch feats from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. These two feats function similar to another, but have a few key differences. First, let's talk about what they do. Both of these feats allow you to increase either your intelligence, wisdom, or charisma score by 1 to a max of 20. They both provide you with a specific 2nd level spell and your choice of 1 1st level spell from a specific school of magic. And you get to cast each of these spells for free once per long rest, but can also use your own spell slots for the purposes of upcasting, or if you already used your free casting of these spells. As for what these feats do differently, Fey Touch teaches you the 2nd level spell Misty Step, which is a bonus action spell which teleports you to an unoccupied location you can see within 30 feet of you, which is useful for escaping surrounding enemies, or grant yourself a bit of extra space or movement along the battlefield. As for the 1st level options, you can pick any spell you want to learn, but it must come from the divination or enchantment schools of magic. Combined, these two schools of magic provide a vast array of spells to choose from, including powerful ones like Silvery Barbs and Bless. There are also plenty of flavorful options such as Animal Friendship, Speak with Animals, and Comprehend Languages, which might be useful for out-of-combat situations. A Swords of Valor Bard might even take Hex to make use of the extra 1d6 necrotic damage it provides on an affected target, since they get to make 2 attacks with their extra attack feature, which could realistically mean a plus 2d6 damage increase every turn. Shadow Touched, meanwhile, teaches you the 2nd level spell Invisibility, that lets you touch a creature and make them go invisible for up to 1 hour, or until it's broken by either dropping concentration, or if the invisible creature ends up attacking something, or casting a spell. This is obviously useful for when you or your rogue want to be stealthier when sneaking around an enemy stronghold, And being able to do it for free once per day can save you some spell slots along the way, while also enabling your rogue to scout even more, since they would have less of a chance to be detected. As for the first level spells you can learn, they do have to be from either the illusion or necromancy schools of magic. Unfortunately, your options here are much more limited, and most of them trend towards flavor and roleplay options, like Disguise Self, Silent Image, and Distort Value. However, Shadow Touched has always been an excellent way to give yourself inflict wounds. A very powerful first level spell that deals 3d10 necrotic damage but has a range of touch, which might be a bit of a turn-off for ranged builds, but a nice keep-away option for spellcasters that tend to get rushed down by the enemy every so often. After all, no one really expects the squishy spellcaster that normally sucks in melee range to suddenly hit them with a good old 5th level inflict wounds for a whopping 7d10 necrotic damage all at once. Other than that, Ray of Sickness is okay for inflicting the poison condition on a creature for a fairly decent 2d8 poison damage, but isn't all that great since poison damage isn't all that great. Cause Fear, meanwhile, can be pretty decent at frightening a creature and keeping them away from you while ensuring they have disadvantage on their own ability checks and attack rolls while you're in their line of sight. Either way, these two feats grant the same benefits of not needing to learn the spells provided, which in turn means less spells you have to decide upon taking whenever you level up. Overall, Fate Touched and Shadow Touched are incredibly strong options for most characters, because no matter what you get out of this feat, it's always going to be a net positive. You either get an extra stat boost and 2 extra spells that you get to use for free once per day at worst, or you get to learn 2 spells that you no longer have to consider taking or preparing, while also being able to use them as though they were your normal spells at best. Either way, there's no downside to taking either of these feats, since having more spells as a bard means less decision making you'll have to make later, and more utility and variety you have both inside and outside of combat. It's this complement with Bard's specialty of being a jack of all trades that makes these two feats take the #1 spot on this list.